Charles Whitmore ducked beneath the mercantile doorway as dawn light stretched across the wooden floor. Rejueries. At 6 feet 7 inches, the world had never quite fit him, but he'd learned to fold himself into its corners with practiced grace. His shadow reached the far wall before his boots crossed the threshold. The pot-belly stove needed tending. Charles knelt before it, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he arranged kindling, and struck a match. Flame caught and spread, pushing back November's first real cold. "Morning, Papa," Sarah said from the back room. His 10-year-old daughter emerged carrying the account ledger, her dark hair already braided for the day. "Morning, little bird." Charles smiled as she climbed onto the stool behind the counter. They worked in comfortable silence, preparing the store for customers. The bell above the door chimed. Mrs. Henderson shuffled in, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. She barely reached Charles's chest, but she'd never shown fear of his size. That made her rare. "Morning." "Charles, need fabric for my granddaughter's winter dress." Charles moved toward the fabric wall, his footsteps careful and quiet. Children playing outside the window instinctively stepped aside as his shadow passed. He'd long ago stopped hoping they wouldn't. A blue or green, Mrs. Henderson. He displayed bolts of cloth across his forearms, each one small against his frame. "The blue? You've got an eye for it." "Charles, I'd wet chi." He cut the fabric with careful precision, his large fingers managing the scissors with unexpected delicacy. Sarah wrapped the purchase in brown paper, mimicking her father's methodical movements. "You coming to the harvest dance Saturday?" Mrs. Henderson asked, counting coins into Sarah's palm. "A busy time at the store," Charles said, his voice soft as always. "But you folks enjoy." Mrs. Henderson's expression flickered with something like pity. Sarah's eyes found the floor. After the woman left, Charles and Sarah ate lunch in the back room. Bread, cheese, and silence. Through the window, Charles could see the Henderson homestead chimney puffing smoke. Further out, the Morrison place, but one chimney stood cold against the gray sky. "Papa, that's the 3rd day the Crane place has no smoke," Sarah said. Following his gaze, "Margaret Crane's a widow," Charles said quietly. "Might be visiting family." But unease settled in his chest like a stone. He returned to the front and added extra wood to the stove, banking it carefully. The fire needed tending before it went cold. Some things couldn't be allowed to die out. Charles stood at the window as afternoon light faded. The distant chimney remained smokeless. He thought of Catherine, how quickly warmth could leave the world. "Folks need to prepare for hard weather," he murmured. Sarah looked up from her sweeping but said nothing. Her father had been preparing for hard weather for 5 years now, ever since Mama died. Preparing, but never quite believing warmth would return. The door slammed open with such force that the bell tore loose and clattered across the floor. Charles spun from the fabric wall as a small figure burst through. 8-year-old Lily Crane stood gasping, tears streaming down her face. Her dress was torn, one shoe missing. She looked at Charles and his towering height, and for a moment he thought she might run, but desperation overcame fear. "Please," she sobbed. "They're hurting my mama. She's sick and they're taking everything." Charles crossed the distance in 3 strides and knelt, making himself small. At this angle, Lily stood taller than him. He kept his voice soft. "Slow down. Child, who's hurting your mother?" "Men, 2 men. They're pulling our furniture outside. Mama's got the fever and can't even stand, but they won't listen." Her small body shook. "They said we can't pay. They said we gotta leave." Sarah appeared with a cup of water and a blanket. She wrapped it around Lily's shoulders without being asked, En Osara Buinai. Charles felt something shift in his chest as he watched his daughter's instinctive compassion. Your mama's name is Margaret? Charles asked. Lily nodded. And she's fevered. 3 weeks now. She tries to get up, but she's too weak. And now those men. Fresh sobs choked her words. Charles stood slowly, his decision already made. He walked to the counter and flipped the open sign to closed. By refer edna bening by. In 10 years of operating the mercantile, he'd never closed during business hours. Sarah, lock up after we leave. I'm taking Lily home. I thought you say. He moved to the stable behind the store and let out his draft horse, a massive gray gelding bred for pulling freight wagons. Charles lifted Lily as if she weighed nothing and settled her behind the saddle. Midelstan Stunaminal Kur. You're big enough to stop them, right? Lily whispered, her small arms wrapping around his waist as he mounted. Charles felt the weight of her hope settle across his shoulders like a yoke. He thought of Margaret Crane's cold chimney, of Catherine's final fevered days, of all the fires that went out while people looked away. Hold tight, he said. Sarah brought her own mare from the stable. I'm coming too. Papa? Charles wanted to argue, but saw the set of her jaw. Catherine's jaw. He nodded once. They rode out as the first snowflakes began to fall. The trail to the Crane homestead wound through stands of bare cottonwoods. Charles kept the pace steady, mindful of Lily clinging behind him. Each hoofbeat carried him deeper into memory. 5 years ago, Catherine had developed the same fever. For 3 weeks she'd fought it while Charles paced their small cabin like a caged animal, his size and strength utterly useless. The doctor had done what he could. The town women had brought soup. Charles had prayed to a God he wasn't sure listened. The fever won. He'd buried her on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, town women appeared at his door offering to care for infant Sarah, their kindness barely masking their discomfort with his grief. Charles was too large, too raw, too much. He thanked them and closed the door. He'd raised Sarah alone, teaching her self-sufficiency, because it was all he knew. They needed no one. The town needed his mercantile, and he needed their money. It was enough, except it wasn't. Mama says you're the tallest man she ever saw, Lily said quietly. I expect I am. Ray Steery. She says you're nice, though. Says you always give her fair weight on flour. Charles's throat tightened. Margaret Crane had lost her husband 2 years back in a mining accident. Recode off by Tivad. She'd been slowly drowning ever since, and Charles had sold her flour at fair weight and watched her chimney go cold. Your mama's a good woman, he said, ahead. The Crane homestead came into view. Furniture sat stacked in the yard. 2 men moved between house and pile with methodical efficiency. On the porch, a makeshift cot held a woman whose fevered stillness Charles recognized too well. Lily made a small, wounded sound. Charles thought of Catherine's last words, spoken in brief lucidity between fever dreams. Charles, your size is a gift. It means you can carry what others cannot. He'd failed to carry her. But perhaps that was why he'd been given another chance. The smokeless chimney rose against gray sky. Charles touched his heels to the gelding's flanks and rode forward. It's my beside a coin pie. Charles dismounted, and the world seemed to adjust around his full height. Both men froze mid-task. A wooden chair suspended between them. Against the autumn sky, Charles looked carved from granite. Afternoon, gentlemen. His voice remained soft despite his size. I'm Charles Whitmore. Own the mercantile in town. I repay. The older man set down his end of the chair. Frank Meadows. Mr. Whitmore? This here's Deputy Cole. We're executing eviction orders for the bank. I see that. Charles walked to the porch where Margaret Crane lay barely conscious. Her skin held fever's flush, her breathing shallow. Lily scrambled down from the horse and ran to her mother. Mama. I brought help. Mr. Whitmore came. Margaret's eyes opened briefly. Unfocused. Lily. Charles knelt beside the cot, up close. He could see Margaret was perhaps 30. Her face drawn with illness and worry, dark hair stuck to her fevered forehead. Mrs. Crane, I'm Charles Whitmore. Your daughter asked me to help. Can't pay. Margaret whispered. 3 months behind. Tried, but... Her words dissolved into coughing. Charles stood and faced the men. How much does she owe? Frank checked his papers. $147. Bank's been patient. But I'll guarantee the debt personally. Give me 24 hours to settle terms with President Hargrove. Deputy Cole frowned. That's irregular. Mr. Whitmore. So is evicting a fevered woman in November. I say. Charles kept his voice gentle, but his physical presence filled the space like a weather front. I've done business with the bank 12 years. Never missed a payment. You know I'm good for it. Frank and Cole exchanged glances. Charles's reputation as an honest merchant carried weight, and his sheer size made disagreeing feel unwise. 24 hours, Frank said finally. But if the bank won't accept your guarantee, we finish this tomorrow. Fair enough. Charles turned to Sarah. Ride back to town. Fetch Dr. Morrison and tell him it's urgent. Bring blankets from the store and start soup on our stove. We'll need it. Sarah nodded and galloped off. Charles walked to the house and found the hearth cold, the room stripped of warmth and hope. He knelt before the fireplace and began building a fire with wood from the pile outside. His large hands worked with practiced efficiency. Deputy Cole appeared in the doorway, carrying the cot with Margaret still on it. I'm on and soaked in. Figured she should be inside. Appreciate that. Charles struck a match. Flame caught and spread through the kindling. Frank helped move the furniture back inside while Charles coaxed the fire higher. Kai. Within 20 minutes, warmth began filling the cold rooms. Margaret stirred on the cot, now positioned near the hearth. Her fevered eyes found Charles's massive silhouette against the growing flames. Oh, who are you? She whispered. Just a neighbor. Ma'am. Charles pulled a blanket over her. Rest now. As the fire grew, Charles felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Not hope exactly, but its distant cousin, purpose. 3 days passed in a rhythm of care. Dr. Morrison confirmed pneumonia. Serious but treatable with rest, warmth, and medicine. He left bottles and instructions. Charles paid him at the door, pressing extra bills into the doctor's hand. For discretion, Charles said quietly. Dr. Morrison studied the giant's face. You're a good man, Charles Whitmore. Just doing what's right. But they both knew it was more than that. Sarah and Lily formed an instant bond. The way lonely children sometimes do. Sarah taught Lily how to organize spools at the mercantile, how to sweep properly, how to wrap purchases in brown paper. Lily taught Sarah about her mother's planned garden, about wildflowers, about laughing without always being quiet. Charles watched them together and wondered if he'd been wrong to keep Sarah so isolated. The girl bloomed with companionship like a flower finally given water. At the bank, President Hargrove listened to Charles's proposal with stern attention. He was a fair man, if rigid. You're taking on significant risk. Mr. Whitmore, I am... May I ask why you barely know this woman? Charles thought of Catherine, of cold chimneys, of a world where people drowning made no sound. Because someone should. Hargrove studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I'll structure it as your debt. 6 months interest-free. Then standard terms. That's the best I can do. That's generous. Thank you. Charles signed papers committing nearly half his savings. He didn't mention it to anyone. At the homestead, Margaret's lucid periods grew longer. She told Charles her story in fragments between sleep, interstater chai bawai. Her husband Thomas had died in a mine collapse 2 years ago. She'd tried keeping the homestead alone, but crops failed and debt mounted. Pride had kept her from asking for help until help was no longer possible. I should have sold, she whispered. Should have moved to town. Found work. But this was Thomas's dream. Felt like betraying him. Dreams change shape. Charles said, doesn't make them less real. Like, say, one evening, Margaret's fever spiked. She thrashed in fevered delirium, crying out for Thomas. Charles sat beside her through the night, keeping her from hurting herself in her confusion. She reached for his hand. Thomas, you came back. No, ma'am, I'm Charles. Charles Whitmore, but she'd already slipped back under fever's weight. The moment shook him. How thin the line between survival and catastrophe. How easily Margaret could have been Catherine. How easily any of them could be the ones with cold hearths and empty hands. Or Ben. The next morning, townspeople began appearing with food and supplies. Mrs. Henderson brought bread. The blacksmith delivered firewood. A rancher's wife brought preserves and offered to sit with Margaret. Charles accepted their help. Something he'd never done for himself. In doing so, he felt walls he'd built beginning to crack. Sarah found him banking the hearth late one night. Papa, we're going to keep the fire going. Right. Even when Lily and her mama are better. Charles looked at his daughter's earnest face. That fire doesn't go out. Someone always tends it. That's what neighbors do. Sarah smiled. It was the first time Charles had said neighbors, without making it sound like strangers. The first winter storm hit without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Wind screamed through gaps in the homestead's roof where shingles had loosened over neglected years. Snow found every weakness. Charles was at the mercantile when word arrived that his major supply shipment was delayed. The freight company cited the storm. Without that inventory, Christmas season would devastate his finances. He'd already committed so much to Margaret's debt. He rode to the homestead through blinding snow and found water dripping through the roof into Margaret's room. She sat up in bed, still weak but determined. I can help repair it, she insisted. Ma'am, you can barely stand. I won't be useless in my own home. She tried rising and immediately swayed. Charles caught her before she fell. Stubborn woman. Stubborn giant, she shot back, then coughed violently. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, summoned by Lily's frightened run to town. He examined Margaret, his face grave. The exertion has set her back. Another serious setback could be fatal. Her lungs are damaged. After he left, Charles climbed onto the roof despite the storm. Snow swirled around his massive frame as he tore away damaged shingles and hammered new ones. And now our dollars died. The wind tried to push him off, but his weight and strength held firm. He worked through the night, frost forming on his beard. In town, whispers spread. Mrs. Pritchard told customers at the general store that Charles Whitmore was overextending himself. That generosity will bankrupt him. He's too soft for business. President Hargrove pulled Charles aside after church on Sunday. I respect what you're doing, but you're risking your daughter's future. That shipment delay could ruin you. Charles nodded slowly. The words echoed his own growing doubts. At the mercantile, Lily overheard Mrs. Pritchard's comments. The words struck like fists. She was the reason Mr. Whitmore might lose everything. She was the burden. The weight too heavy even for a giant. She ran to the storage room and hid behind flour sacks, sobbing. Sarah found her there an hour later. Instead of questions or comfort, she simply sat beside Lily and cried too. Sarah understood the fear that your existence might cost someone everything. She'd felt it every day since Mama died, watching Papa shrink into himself under the weight of her care. We're not burdens. Sarah finally whispered, Papa told me once that love isn't measured by what it costs. It's measured by what you choose to carry. But what if we're too heavy? Lily asked. Then we help carry each other. They held hands in the darkness while snow piled against the windows. That night, Charles returned home frost-covered and exhausted. His massive coat hung by the fire, steaming as it dried. He sat alone at his small table, head in his hands. The numbers didn't add up. Margaret's debt. The delayed shipment. The lost business. The repairs. He'd tried to carry too much. In saving Margaret, he might drown Sarah. The isolation that had protected him for 5 years whispered its familiar comfort. Stay separate. Stay safe. Help no one, because helping breaks you. Charles stared at the fire and wondered if he'd been wrong about everything. Margaret's fever spiked again near midnight. Dr. Morrison worked through the small hours but finally shook his head. I've done all I can. It's up to her constitution now. And her will. Charles sat in the mercantile's back room afterward, alone in the darkness. Financial ruin seemed certain. Margaret might die anyway. Lily would become an orphan. Sarah would watch her father lose everything trying to save strangers. Perhaps helping had been pride, not compassion. Perhaps his size had made him think he could carry what no man could. The door opened quietly. Sarah stood in her nightgown, a shawl around her shoulders. Papa. Go back to bed, little bird. Instead, she crossed the room and knelt beside his chair. She took his large hand in both of hers, and for a moment, they reversed the child, comforting the giant. Mama told me something before she died. Sarah said softly. I was too little to understand then, but I remember the words. She said, we're only as tall as what we choose to carry. You're carrying what matters. Papa. Charles felt his throat close. Lily said something yesterday. Sarah continued. She said your size makes people feel small in a good way. Like their troubles get smaller when you're there. I cried. She squeezed his hand. That's a gift. Papa, don't stop using it because you're scared. They sat together in the darkness until the first hint of dawn touched the windows. Then Charles stood. His decision made, he rode to the homestead and found Margaret thrashing with fever. Her breathing labored. Imaba Dabar. Dr. Morrison dozed in a chair, exhausted. Charles took up position beside the bed and simply sat, his presence a bulwark against death's approach. He began talking, his soft voice filling the quiet. He told Margaret about Catherine, about learning to be alone, about fearing his size made him unwelcome in the world. He told her about Sarah growing up without her mother's gentleness. He told her about 5 years of cold isolation. You're going to live, he said to her unconscious form, because Lily needs you, and because this town needs what you'll become. And maybe because I need to believe that warmth can return after cold. Near dawn, Margaret's fever broke. Her eyes opened briefly. Clear for the first time in days, she saw Charles's massive silhouette against the lamplight. Why, her voice was barely a whisper, because it's what neighbors do. Her eyes closed again, but her breathing had steadied. Dr. Morrison woke, checked her pulse, and smiled. She's turned the corner. Why, sunrise broke over the snow-covered town. The storm passed. Charles watched light spread across white fields, feeling something he'd forgotten. Not just hope. Peace. Townspeople began arriving as word spread. Mrs. Pritchard came with fresh bread and tears in her eyes. I'm sorry for what I said. Charles, you showed us what we should have been doing all along. Charles accepted her apology with grace. The fire Margaret needed had been lit. Now it would spread 3 weeks later. Margaret sat at her kitchen table looking stronger. Though still thin, President Hargrove and then Dr. Morrison gathered around her. Lily and Sarah played outside, their laughter drifting through the window. I need to know the full extent of my debt, Margaret said firmly. Charles shifted uncomfortably in a chair too small for his frame. Mrs. Crane. Margaret, and I won't be in the dark about my own finances. Hargrove cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore purchased your entire debt from the bank and restructured it interest-free for 6 months. The amount was $147. He's also paid for medical care, repairs, and supplies. The total comes to roughly $300. Margaret's face went pale. 300. She looked at Charles. Why would you do that? Not pity. Charles said quietly. Recognition that circumstances created your crisis. Not character. Could have been any of us. I didn't ask for rescue. No, ma'am. But your daughter asked for her mother, and saying no to a child's plea for her mother. That's not strength. That's cowardice. The words hung in the air. Margaret's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I'll repay every cent. When you're able, no rush, no interest. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. Margaret, I've been impressed by your understanding of healing, the way you've absorbed everything I've taught about caring for yourself. Dr. Done. I'm getting older, and this town needs a nurse. I'd like to train you properly if you're willing. Ida Margaret stared. You're offering me work. I'm offering you a profession. You have the aptitude and the heart for it. The town would pay fair wages. Charles watched Margaret process this. Not charity, but recognition. Not rescue, but opportunity. I accept, she said finally. But I need to contribute something now. I have another skill. She explained that before Thomas died. She'd managed books for the mining company. She could keep accounts, track inventory, manage finances, if Charles needed help at the mercantile. I'll hire you part-time. Charles interrupted. Fair wages. You can work off the debt if you insist. But it's real work I need. Not make work. Deal. Ask it be. Margaret extended her hand. Charles shook it carefully, his massive hand engulfing hers. After the others left, Charles helped Margaret repair the garden fence, preparing for spring planting. He drove posts deep with his strength, while she planned the layout with an eye for beauty and function. Lac Saint-Foif. We'll plant together, she asked. Neighbors do. Charles said. Sarah and Lily ran between the fence posts, already arguing happily about which vegetables to grow. Charles looked at the rebuilt homestead. Smoke rising steady from the chimney. The fire he'd lit had taken root. It wouldn't go out now. Spring arrived with sudden warmth that melted the last snow and turned the prairie green. Bye be you. Aye. Charles stood at the mercantile window, watching the world wake up. Margaret had been working as his bookkeeper for 2 months now, and his accounts had never been cleaner. She'd found inefficiencies he'd lived with for years, saving him money he'd never known he was losing. She'd paid off nearly half her debt already, though Charles had told her repeatedly there was no rush. As the town's assistant nurse, she'd become indispensable. She'd helped Dr. Morrison through a difficult birth last week, probably saving both mother and child. People trusted her, sought her counsel. She moved through town with quiet confidence, no longer the fevered woman on a porch cot. The bell above the door chimed. Margaret entered with Lily, both carrying baskets. Morning, Charles. We brought muffins from the first batch. Margaret set the basket on the counter, where Sarah was already working. Your chimney's been smoking steady these past months, Charles observed. That fire doesn't go out, Margaret said softly, echoing his words from winter. Someone's always tending it. A young farmer named Hayes burst through the door, his face tight with worry. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Crane, we got trouble. The Mitchells are being evicted today. John Mitchell broke his leg in March. Couldn't work. And now the bank? Margaret and Charles exchanged a glance. How much do they owe? Charles asked. Near $200. We'll go, Margaret said immediately. Charles, you talk to Hargrove. I'll talk to Dr. Morrison about John's care. Between us, we can work something out. Charles nodded. They moved together with practiced efficiency. Two people who'd learned that burdens shared were burdens halved. By afternoon, the Mitchell eviction had been postponed. Charles guaranteed part of the debt. Margaret arranged medical payment plans, and 3 other townspeople stepped forward to help. The pattern was multiplying. That evening, Charles organized a town meeting about creating a cooperative fund for families facing crisis. The turnout surprised him. People wanted to help. They just needed someone to show them how. Mrs. Pritchard pledged the first donation. Others followed. Within an hour, they'd raised $300. As people filed out, President Hargrove approached Charles. You've changed this town. Charles Whitmore made us remember what community means. Just lit a fire, Charles said. Others kept it going. Later, Charles and Sarah walked home through spring twilight. Sarah slipped her hand into his. Papa, are we still lonely? Charles thought about Margaret stopping by for morning coffee, about Lily and Sarah planning the summer garden together, about townspeople greeting him by name with genuine warmth, about the cooperative fund that would protect families before crisis struck. No. Little bird, I don't think we are. At the mercantile, Charles added wood to the potbelly stove out of habit. Destin waiting kai. Though spring warmth made it unnecessary. Through the window, he could see the Crane homestead chimney in the distance, smoke rising straight and steady into the calm evening air. That fire he'd lit on a desperate November day had never gone out. It had spread from hearth to hearth, warming more than just one family. He thought of Catherine's words about carrying what others cannot. and finally understood. Say Dan's. He'd been carrying wrong for 5 years, carrying alone. Carrying away. True carrying meant carrying together, carrying toward. The mercantile's warmth spread into the spring evening, and Charles Whitmore, who'd once believed his size made him separate, finally understood that true strength builds belonging. One lit hearth at a time, Sarah appeared beside him at the window. "Papa, what are you thinking about?" Charles smiled and pulled his daughter close. "I'm thinking your mama was right. We're only as tall as what we choose to carry. And we're carrying the right things now." "Yes," Charles said softly. "We're carrying the right things." Outside, the town settled into evening. Smoke rose from every chimney. Each one a promise kept. A fire maintained. A neighbor remembered. The cold had passed. Warmth had returned. And it would not go out again.